Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you may be. Welcome to Urban Trees, bringing the canopy to all. This is the last of 3 60-minute webinars that we've held over the last 3 weeks. And today's session is Equitable Approaches to Urban Tree Planting. My name is Victor Reyes, Program Manager at Sustainability Network, coming to you from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Sustainability Network is a nonprofit capacity builder that has been serving the environmental nonprofit community since 1997. We help nonprofits lead, manage, and strategize. If you'd like to learn more about our events and our programs, please visit our website at sustainabilitynetwork.ca. This webinar series is brought to you in partnership with Nature Canada, one of the oldest national nature conservation charities in our country. And today we are joined by over 460 people, or those are the ones who've registered for this webinar series, coming from all 10 provinces of Canada, plus the Yukon. And we are also joined by friends from the US, Mexico, and Brazil.
Nice.
Now, before we begin the webinar proper, just a few housekeeping rules. Please type your questions in the Q&A box and not the chat box. Please use the chat box to interact and share resources with each other. A recording and the presentation slides will be made available and the link emailed to you within 1 business day. And now to tell you more about Nature Canada and this webinar series and to introduce our presenters, let me pass the floor to Erin Whittingham of Nature Canada. Erin, over to you.
Thanks, Victor. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to the Sustainability Network for partnering with us on this series. So my name is Erin Whittingham, and I am a Nature Network organizer at Nature Canada. And a little bit about us for those who aren't familiar. So Nature Canada, we represent a wide network of members and nature organizations working towards discovering, enjoying, and defending nature. And we wanted to offer this webinar series today to share what is already being done about tree equity, as well as inspire action across the country. And we do have some resources developed to help support this action. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen. And so essentially, we want to be helping groups do this work of advancing tree equity within their cities. And we're here to support you throughout that process. So we have a tree equity report that came out in 2022 that goes in depth on the issue as a challenge and the barriers to addressing it. The first webinar session part of this series went deeper into it, so definitely recommend checking that out. We also offer advocacy support to groups who are working towards tree equity within their cities, so one-on-one phone calls to troubleshoot issues, to develop a campaign strategy, anything that's needed to support the groups to do that work. We want to support you in doing it. And we also connect groups and regions, as well as groups who may be coming up against similar challenges. We're able to connect groups from across the country. And we also have a toolkit coming out in the fall that I'll go into a bit more in depth on in just a moment. And we also have a community of practice that will help guide groups through that toolkit. And so this is just our little sneak peek into that tree equity toolkit that we'll be releasing. It starts off with guiding groups through a coalition building process. Since this tree equity is an intersectional issue, we really see the strength of working with multiple groups within your city on the issue. And then it goes a little bit deeper into how to approach it respectfully, considering there are going to be different perspectives within your coalition, and there will be different lived experiences. So it's important that we're doing this work with respect. And then it helps groups answer these 4 questions. Who are our people? So who will show up and support your mission, your goals. It helps groups get clear on what their goals are, what exactly the issue is within their city. And then it helps groups through the process of determining what is your theory of change and what are your tactics to achieve your goals. So why are we doing this work? So it's our mission. We want to be supporting community groups across the country in their efforts to ensure that every neighborhood, regardless of income or race, are benefiting from a thriving urban tree canopy cover. So if you're interested in any of those supports, there's a contact link in the chat. We'd love to hear from you and see how we can support you in this work. And now I am pleased to introduce our first speakers today, Patricia Stirbys and Peter Croal from the National Healing Forest Initiative. Patricia is a member of Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan and specializes in Indigenous relations. Born and raised in Ontario, she holds a Master of Laws degree from the University of Ottawa and has worked with Indigenous communities, industry, and government on a broad range of issues. Her goal is to foster positive relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities that can lead to lasting gains for Canada. And presenting alongside Patricia is Peter, who was an exploration geologist for the federal government and Canadian International Development Agency, where he contributed to programs that allowed the development community to better work with Indigenous peoples to create more effective impact assessments and poverty reduction programs around the world. Over to you, Patricia and Peter.
Hello, everybody. So I'm really happy to be presenting here today with Peter, co-founder of the National Healing Forest and my friend. And so as the slides coming up here, yeah, it's the National Healing Forest Initiative. We co-founded to recognize, remember children who were lost to residential school. And it is a reconciliation effort. So in the next slide, that's us. Look at those cute faces. So my motivation for, co-founding this with Peter, besides me being the First Nation and Peter, he calls himself the settler guy. The settler, that in itself is the first reconciliation move and for us to create this initiative together. But my mom went to residential school, and I'm, I guess, a first generation survivor of residential schools. And I saw some of the challenges that my mom faced, and Peter can share some of his motivations as well when he starts in a couple minutes. So in the next slide, this is the Marival Indian residential school that my mom had attended, and a number of my aunts and uncles as well. And my sister has a brick that's got my mom's. My mom had scraped her name into the brick, so we have that when the building was torn down around 1996, 97. So some of you may know about residential schools, and they ran for decades and decades, and the last one closed around 1996. But its purpose, early on was to teach English to the First Nations, teach them to, read and understand the Bible and really convert to Christianity. And, the federal government had its reasons for overseeing Indians and lands reserved for Indians. They took that responsibility over Indigenous peoples across Canada, and to take responsibility for education as well. But a big move was to remove children from their cultural and family influence to be able to integrate them into the broader society. The residential school objectives, aside from assimilation into white society, was to end the Indian problem, which was only a problem to the settlers who were wanting to come in and expand across the various territories. And, the church was very much implicated in what went forward. And they didn't have a really positive view of Indigenous peoples themselves. It was mainly to, have Indigenous people not really like themselves. And so that once they graduated, the children, the youth wouldn't really understand their culture. And so make that assimilation much easier. So this is where Peter and this is where I guess the first stages of and ideas for the National Healing Force began back in 2015 on that walk for reconciliation. It was great. There were so many people, like I don't know if there's something like 10,000 people who were walking across the bridge from the Quebec side to the Ottawa side to Parliament. And this was just prior to the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, and in which there are 94 calls to action. Very interesting to read. You can see all of the issues that impact Indigenous peoples when you read the 94 calls to action. And so here, Peter and I were walking alongside each other, and he was deep in thought. We didn't really know each other, and he said, there's this idea, maybe using trees and nature to support some kind of reconciliation and healing. And I think it was the next weekend or the weekend after that, we sat down and had a coffee and started to create what is now the National Healing Forest Initiative. So reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem, it is a Canadian one. And so it's really important to understand that we are all treaty people. It's not just one-sided, right? It's a relationship, it's a treaty relationship, it's an agreement between two multiple parties, but Indigenous and the government. So we need to keep that in mind as we go forward, because it's the relationship is for us all to heal together. Yes, so we see that the Healing Forest respects several calls to action that I just mentioned from the TRC report. Call to action 12 relates to culturally appropriate childhood education. There are calls to action on churches and reconciliation, education and reconciliation. And we've had a number of schools, youth that have participated in the creation of healing forests within their school and near their schools. Missing children burial information, and this has really hit at the heart of many communities. There were news releases that came out, from British Columbia, etc., and in my own nation about burial sites that were located. The importance of commemoration are also in 4 of the different calls to actions, and also teaching newcomers about Canadian education, including Indigenous peoples in Canada. Very important. So the National Healing Forest, what are they? They are outdoor green spaces. They are used for reconciliation, partnership building, really connecting people to nature, having people return to these wonderful outdoor spaces and talk about reconciliation, talk about the history, and learn from elders and others who may or may not be connected directly with Indian Residential School, but who have knowledge to share. And it is really about reciprocating information in these outdoor green spaces. And that beautiful logo was created by Diana sorry, I've just forgotten her name. She did such a beautiful job. She's a non-Indigenous woman, but she really had like a magical heart, and she really captured the essence of the National Healing Forest Initiative. Planning a partnership and developing a healing forest really starts with community, and it really is grassroots. Peter and I don't regulate, manage, tell people what to do. Folks will come to us and say, we'd like to create a healing forest. So community members who come together they create a partnership, a community group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous. partnership. And so people, grassroots, each of you who are on this call, wherever you are, this is really an initiative that is all about healing and bringing people together. And I think we have, each have kind of responsibility in a part that we can play really across the world. And right now it seems like it's more needed than ever. And the core steps are assembling a small group of like-minded people. The partnership is really important with an Indigenous community. Selecting a beautiful location, having that partnership with Indigenous communities is really important. So it'll be in every case, there's going to be traditional territory upon which you are creating that healing forest. And so to have that, Indigenous community relationship is quite important. And, spread the word, share it with around your community that you're creating this healing forest, and get all kinds of support. And in the end, you have this beautiful ceremony and gathering, and have some food and prayer and story sharing. And that's the way that Peter and I envision this. And we've seen these unfold there are 25 or so healing forests in existence, and another 25 or so that are in various stages of development. And so we're really excited about how this has grown. Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Patricia. That's great. And thank you, Nature Canada, and hello, everybody, wherever you are. I'm glad you could be with us today. And the idea of a healing forest is, I just want to reiterate what Patricia said, is that reconciliation is a very difficult topic. It's full of issues, but it's full of imagination, and it's full of possibility as well. And the reason why we are doing this project is because it's very difficult to practice reconciliation inside buildings, inside constructed spaces that were designed and maintained by the culture which caused the problem of the residential school system in the first place. So a natural place for reconciliation is outside. And it's more in tune with First Nation culture, Métis and Inuit culture, being connected to the land. So the possibilities, as Patricia said, there's 25 healing forests now in Canada, and they're all different. Each one is unique because they are created by the community in partnership with First Nations themselves. Patricia and I don't get physically involved. We might have webinars, we might have meetings, we might link people up. We can point to where pots of money might exist and that kind of thing. But we don't get physically involved. It's all at your level of visioning and developing the healing forest. So I'm going to show some examples of healing forests. Here's one, First Nations on Prince Edward Island, the Agaboit First Nation, the Scotch Forest Reserve. It was a barren piece of land, and the non-Indigenous community and the Indigenous community worked together to do a reforestation project. And it has a space for ceremony. It has a place for honoring elders and ancestors and education, but it's theirs, developed by the community with the First Nation community. Next slide. Just outside of Ottawa, an hour outside of Ottawa, is the Perth Healing Forest. It's a bit more small, but it's being expanded year by year, and it's right by a beautiful river. It's in a municipal park, and the municipal council heard of this idea and said, this is a fantastic idea, and they gave the community some funding to help develop this space. And Patricia and I have been to gatherings and ceremony at this healing forest, and over 200 people generally come on September 30th to hear the stories of residential school survivors and to bring the two cultures together in a good way to learn about reconciliation and how to move forward. Next slide. Winnipeg, Manitoba. Again, this is also in a municipal park. It was one of the first healing forests to be developed, and it's a bit more constructed. The Council of Winnipeg was so taken by the idea of a healing forest that they found a budget for a landscape architect to develop quite a more elaborate space, and you can see that in the next slide. There's an aerial view and a just a regular picture there. And what's unique about these healing forests across the country is that they're not exclusionary. So if a community wants to develop a healing forest in a public park or a school or a university, it doesn't mean that they're excluded from using these spaces for anything else. So people come as you would to a park to read a book, chase a ball, walk your dog, that kind of thing. But there's also spaces, there's also signage at these healing forests, which do a certain amount of education. And then on special days, such as June 20th or June 21st or September 30th, which is the new National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, communities will gather to have special ceremony on these spaces. Next slide. And you can also have healing forest on private land. There's one just east of Montreal, a place called Fitch Bay. And that gentleman there, Terry, has some land, and he heard about the healing forest, and he was so taken by the idea. And he's absolutely crazy about trees to begin with. He said, this is a good marrying of my interest in trees and reconciliation. And he invited the local Mohawk and Odanak community to join with him in developing a space on his private land. So he controls access to the land, of course, but he invites the communities to come on special days to honor the issues regarding reconciliation. Next slide. This is an amazing healing forest. This is one on Cape Breton Island, developed by the Riverside Public School. And it's a 2-kilometer path. It winds through the Acadian forest. It's absolutely beautiful. There's teaching spots all along this path about the culture of the Mi'kmaq. And at the center of this 2-kilometer trail is the actual healing forest space where children from the school and anybody actually can come and gather and learn about reconciliation. Most of the kids in this school actually prefer to be taught outside, and their spaces on this trail to have their classes outside. And we've seen these outdoor classrooms, and they're spectacular. So, and this was done with close cooperation of the Eskasoni community, which is Mi'kmaq community on Cape Breton Island. Next slide. Churches are involved too. This is St. Matthew's in Toronto. Some of you who are from the Toronto area might have been to this church or know of this church. There's a resident elder there now. They called it an elder in residence. And she is a wonderful person who helps guide the ceremony and guide the education programs on reconciliation for the parishioners and guests to the church. Next slide. So it says there's 22 healing forests. Actually, it's probably about 25 or 26. They sort of keep popping up as we roll along here. The Royal Canadian Geographic Society is a partner in this project now, and so is the David Suzuki Foundation. They were very generous for the last couple of years in providing seed funding to communities to help get the healing forest going. And they don't have those funds at the moment, but there are other pots of money across the country where communities are accessing to develop these spaces. The Network of Nature is also a partner and in helping share news, and Nature Canada is, I mean, who is a partner? Anybody's a partner that wants to just help share the news about the healing forest, because if you like the idea, Patricia and I want to stress this, if you like the idea of a healing forest, it's your idea. You don't have to come to us for permission. There's no forms or bureaucracy or boards or anything like that. We don't. We just have this idea that we develop with communities in partnership, and that's how it works. And you guys just run with it. And when you feel that it's done and you've got a healing forest, then we can share the computer graphics for the logo with you. And then we can put all the information that you want to share on the National Healing Forest website. Next slide, please. So this is an example of some of the funding where, the kind of levels of funding, it's all variable. Some healing forests, you could probably develop it for $1,000. The Riverside Public School was over $100,000. Each one is unique. There is no one model. It depends on the capacity, vision, and resources of the respective community. Next slide. The challenges, well, the biggest one I would think is that both Patricia and I stress is developing a meaningful and intentional relationship with the First Nation community on whose land you're developing the healing forest. So it's more than likely going to be traditional territory. So I'm in Ottawa, Patricia and I are in Ottawa, and we're on the Algonquin traditional territory. And so we reach out to the Algonquins when we have questions about healing forests, or the community of Ottawa reaches out to the Algonquin people to ask questions and develop partnerships. So if you're in Cape Breton, you would reach out to the Mi'kmaq and so on. So you find that First Nation community and develop a meaningful relationship with them. And it might take a year or two to get that sense of trust, but that's part of reconciliation, is getting to know each other. Funding, there's always a challenge, but there is money out there in various pots. We've got sort of a list of potential agencies that provide funding to these kinds of projects now. Momentum takes time and patience, yes, and that relationship building with Indigenous communities, as I said, may take a year or more, but that is the like the royal jelly of this exercise, is getting that relationship, because once you have that relationship, it is absolutely transformational for the individuals involved in the healing forest and for the communities that develop one. Next slide, please. There's a logo. Patricia talked about that a bit, and we're just so pleased with what Diana did. You can see the trees, the leaves. You can see a mother in the center there holding her babies. At her feet, left and right, are the young children, the children that didn't survive the residential schools, but also the children of the future, who yet to be born kind of thing. So it's a very meaningful logo, and an elder looked at this logo and he said, my goodness, I'm looking at this and I see, I'm actually looking at a turtle head straight on, as if you were on the ground on your hands and knees looking at a turtle. So he thought that was pretty good, because, you know, we're on the back of a turtle in North America, Turtle Island. So that was kind of an interesting indirect benefit of this logo. Next slide, please.
Just want to mention it was Diana Coots of
Yes.
Market Design.
Yeah.
I think we're almost done.
Yeah,
Peter.
we're almost done. We're
We've
almost
got like
done.
a minute,
And
30 seconds.
the core message, get that partnership, get a vision, do it yourself, do it with meaning, do it with your heart, and come and talk to us when you want, and we'll help along the way. And there's a website that you can go to. And is it working? Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, is it working? This is Grand Chief Stephen Augustine, Mi'kmaq Hereditary Chief. Yes, he was involved in the healing forest in Cape Breton, and he does think that this is legitimate work. This is reconciliation in action. Next slide. There you go. There's our email. Thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you whenever. Thank you, Aaron.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Patricia and Peter. It's so much great to learn about the initiative. And I've been to the Birch Path Healing Forest in Ottawa, and there's this big line of white birches, and it just has this backdrop of the green and the browns, and it was so striking. And that was many years ago, and I can still vividly see it. So I recommend everyone on this call go on the website, check out if there's one in your community. And go see it, as well as start dreaming and imagining where one could go. I know from listening to this presentation, I know of a park where it would be a great location for one. So thanks so much, Patricia and Peter, for sharing with us. Now I'd like to introduce our next set of speakers, Becca Robinson and Aaron Boonstra from Reep Green Solutions. Becca is the Director of Climate Adaptation Programs, where she has helped hundreds of property owners create landscapes that are more resilient to climate change. And she's also led the design and construction of green infrastructure projects on residential and civic properties throughout the Waterloo region. And Aaron is an ISA certified arborist and the manager of tree and winter maintenance programs at Reep Green, where he facilitates their backyard tree planting programs. Over to you, Becca and Aaron.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I'll just take a second to pull up the slides, but I'd also like to first acknowledge that Becca and I are coming from the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So we want to acknowledge that we're situated on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. So as an organization, REEP is committed to engage in the necessary learning, building of relationships, and action required to work towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in our community. So I really appreciate that presentation, Patricia and Peter, and we'll be thinking about areas that we can add in our own healing forest. So I'd also like to take a second just to read a small excerpt from the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving Address, which is also known as the words that come before all else. I think it's a nice way to ground our presentation. This is an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I encourage you to read the rest of this address. We now turn our thoughts to the trees. The earth has many families of trees who have their own instructions and uses. Some provide us with shelter and shade, others with fruit, beauty, and other useful things. The maple is the leader of the trees, to recognize its gift of sugar to the people when they need it most. Many people of the world use a tree as a symbol of peace and strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and our thanks to the tree life. So I'll pass it over to Becca now, and she'll explain a little bit more about REEP and our Community Canopy project.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everybody. So as has been mentioned, we're from an environmental charity based in Kitchener called Reep Green Solutions. Reep's been working in Waterloo region for over 20 years to help people live sustainably. Our mission is to empower the community with the practical tools, knowledge, and capacity for action to make sustainable living the norm. So we have a variety of programs, not all tree related, but we work on home energy efficiency, water conservation, healthy landscapes, waste reduction, and a variety of other things to help empower residents in our area to take climate action. My slide's blank here. Hopefully yours isn't. Okay, there we go. So one way we do this is through our theory of change. So in the years between 2020 and 2030, we're aiming to individually and collectively achieve 10,000 meaningful actions to together shift to a resilient, low carbon future. So what that boils down to is our work is often focused in education and engagement, but we're really trying to transfer that into tangible, meaningful actions in our community that we're tallying up along the way, and our goal is to get 10,000. So an action could be changing the insulation in your attic, or planting a tree, and really everything in between. So one way we do that is through our backyard tree planting program. So this is the partnership program we have with several or all of the municipalities in Waterloo region, and as well in Guelph, outside of the Waterloo region. And it's a subsidized tree planting service where we complete an arborist consultation and deliver and plant the right tree in the right place for private property owners. As a partnership program, this kind of acknowledges that some of the best opportunities in our area to increase the tree canopy in the region lie within the private property sector. And our municipal partners know and understand this and have agreed to work with us to subsidize the cost of this program so we can get more trees on private property as efficiently and low cost as possible. So in 2022, REEP across all of our program areas began to work more in the equity space to take a look at who we currently serve or have served in the past and who we can serve. And so we took a look at our program metrics and began to see some patterns. So we overlaid data of where we've worked in the past 25 years in our community with some socio-demographic data, parcel information, and some environmental factors. And we started to notice a few patterns. So here you can see a couple of examples of patterns we found particularly interesting as it relates to tree equity. we began to notice that some of the areas where our program was most successful and where we had the most uptake by private property owners were also in the areas that had the highest tree canopy already within the city, and very often also had on the higher side of annual income and lower proportionally, a lower proportion of visible minorities or newcomers. So you can see here on the map on the left, we zeroed in on a couple of areas to observe this pattern further. On the left, you see two neighborhoods or study areas that are quite close together, outlined in black. And this is on the City of Kitchener's tree equity, a part of their tree equity analysis tool, where they've assigned equity scores for tree canopy in the community. And you can see the neighborhood to the north has the lowest priority ranking in terms of tree equity, meaning that it has a relatively high tree canopy as well as a relatively high means to increase the canopy, participate in our program, for example. And just south of that neighborhood is a neighborhood in the City of Kitchener that has one of the highest priorities, highest tree equity priorities. So where the tree canopy is the lowest and there may be the most barriers for private property owners to participate in a program like ours. And this data was kind of corroborated by the map on the right in our equity work I mentioned earlier, where we saw the neighborhood, one of the neighborhoods with the highest canopy existing already in Kitchener was also the area that had the most participation in our program. So it's caused us to think a lot about our work, how we're engaging, and how effective it is. And that neighborhood below that has one of the lowest canopy covers in the entire city had also one of the lowest uptakes of our program in the last 5 years. So it looks like one tree planted there on private property in a 5-year period. So here's just an aerial look of those streets in those same two neighborhoods. And one at the top is the neighborhood on the north. And you can see just a dramatic difference. So when we're looking at maps and data and polygons, like 40% to 13% is interesting. But when you look at it visually, like with an aerial photo or a street view image, you can really see what the difference is between 13% canopy and 40%. And it's quite different. On the bottom right photo, you can see that neighborhoods are not far apart. And sometimes like an arterial highway like that is all it takes to have a huge difference, both in demographics, socioeconomics, and tree canopy cover. So again, these are patterns we noticed and have been spending time trying to figure out a new strategy to address them. And so in 2023, we received funding from Green Communities Canada as part of their Living Cities Fund. And with that funding, we had the opportunity to do a little more research on these patterns we were noticing. We identified a study area, which I've already shown a bit more about, and then we got to do more learning about that study area. So we did more on the ground investigations, got to look or learn more about the history of trees and tree loss in this neighborhood over the recent past, met community champions who live there, work there, and began to develop some new engagement techniques that we could use in hopes to reduce the barriers to participation in our program. We also used that funding to reduce the cost of trees, assuming that that was one of the largest barriers to participating in our backyard tree planting program. And so from that was born the Community Canopy Project. So with that funding from GCC and our period of research and development, we worked in close partnership with the City of Kitchener to develop this program aimed to help address tree canopy inequality and plant trees where residents desire them most. And so Aaron is going to walk you through some of the lessons we learned. We've been implementing this project now throughout 2024. We've learned a lot along the way, and Aaron's going to show you what we've done and what we've learned so far.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. So this is just a quick example of a few things that we've learned. We started learning things pretty quickly as soon as we started engaging with this neighborhood. Right off the bat, we learned that this would likely be a highly surveyed neighborhood because of the equity deserving factors that were present. So we knew that we would have to be mindful and considerate of how we engage with residents to ensure there wasn't survey burnout, and especially from a somewhat external organization coming to residents for information. Even though Reep has been working in the region and the city for, like Becca said, over 20 years, we knew that we didn't have the same kind of connections as something like a community center and other kind of local organizations. So right off the bat, we had a survey that we disseminated to different residents and citizens. We learned, for example, right at the beginning that there would be interest in fruit trees. So we typically only plant native fruit trees or deciduous conifers. But this year we decided to add apple and pear trees because we heard from those residents that that was what they were interested in that neighborhood. So this is just one example. And the second example here connects to how we started to reach out with the community and get people involved, really. So the image on the left is kind of our first take at an infographic. It has a lot of dense information. It shows the project boundary and the city as a whole, and has different ways for people to be involved. And after taking a closer look, we realized that we needed to remove some of the background information and keep it pretty easy to understand to really capture people so that they could know what this project is about. We knew that there could be language barriers and less online engagement from this neighborhood. So we also started to have material available in the second and third most common languages, Spanish and Somali, for that neighborhood. So here's another example of a material that we adapted. We created postcards that could be used at events or dropped off in a door-to-door campaign. And we quickly realized we weren't kind of sure how much uptake our program would get just from word spreading in the neighborhood naturally. And we didn't want to create too much demand since we were planting trees for free. But we quickly realized that we wanted to help generate more demand and spread the word through that neighborhood. So we adapted our postcard to be even more clear that it was a free tree planting service. We included visuals to make sure that people know what they would be signing up for, and made some really clear links to our websites and the city of Kitchener there. So that all kind of helped us create our community planting plan, which is just finalized within the last couple of weeks. So I'd like to now share that plan with you as well. And I'll just kind of try to skip through some of the background information fairly quickly. But this is available for anybody as this story map. So residents and other people across the city can learn what we've been doing. So some of the background information is things that Becca and I have already talked about in terms of tree canopy in Kitchener and why we're working in this neighborhood with residents to plant trees where they desire them most. So it shows our target neighborhood here, and it shows that it has a lower tree canopy than the average across the city. So this what we heard section starts to connect to the surveys that we have and plant a pin results. So we created a planted pin map where property owners or citizens could plant pins on the physical boundary of our neighborhood to say where they wanted trees. So we had over 157 pins on the map and 45 different survey results. The survey also had a chance for people to ask questions and things so that we could respond to that feedback and really interact and educate people on why this is important and what work is being done. So this is an example of where the city started to interact with people on some of the questions we had. Some questions related to maintenance or where trees should be going. One of the parks, McLennan Park, seemed like an obvious place because it was fairly open, but it had previously been used as a landfill. So it's important to explain to residents why we can't use certain areas for planting and have their help really in looking for other areas where we can prioritize tree canopy. So that feedback all went into this community planting plan. Public trees planned to plant here is on the City of Kitchener property and the Region of Waterloo property. So the work that we did in engaging with this neighborhood galvanized the work from the municipal owners, property owners, to plant trees on their properties. And this is all backed up by that plant to pin survey, where we noticed certain hotspots in municipal parks, at public schools, along roadsides, and at the community center. So this feedback all went to the city, and that's how we decide where it's possible to plant based on a variety of factors, including the space and underground utilities and those kind of things. So from that pin, it showed that the city will be planting over 100 trees in this area, 72 this fall, with 28 that were already done earlier this year. And all that kind of connects back to the private side of things, which Becca kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but we'll kind of touch on that now as well, because that private land planting is the part that Reep will take over on. And yeah, so I'll pass it back to Becca to close up on the private planting and talk about the future of the project.
Thanks. Yeah. So as Aaron mentioned, really by delineating a study area, engaging with the community, not only have we had the opportunity to identify private property owners who wanted to participate in our program, but really galvanized action from the municipality and the region. So that was a unforeseen benefit, maybe I'd call it, that we got by working with these partners through this project. So back to the map I showed at the beginning. On the left side, we see the participation or uptake of our backyard tree planting program from 2019 to 2023 in these neighborhoods we've been comparing. The map on the right shows the rates of uptake or locations of uptake between 2019 and 2024. So with 1 year of additional funding, increased research, increased boots on the ground, better, more accessible engagement and reduction of cost of the trees to zero, we've really equalized that's an oversimplification, but more or less equalized the participation in these two neighborhoods that were previously quite far apart, both in participation, socioeconomics, and tree canopy. And in the future, we plan to grow this program. So based on that partnership with the City of Kitchener, we're planning on expanding this idea into other areas with a high equity priority in the city. We plan to overlay the data and mapping, which is very valuable, with on-the-ground observations and connections with the community. So weighting heavily the connections we have in the community or the presence of a community champion, just as importantly as mappable data that we have on our computers. So always remembering to get off the computer and go out in the community to add that criteria when we're looking for the next neighborhood where we can work. We also want to continue honing our online versus in-person engagement opportunities. We suspect this will be different in every neighborhood. So we've only piloted this one time, and we don't want to be naive to think we'll repeat the same things exactly in the next neighborhood or with the next community. So trying to stay nimble and try new things every time. And we are also hoping to develop a multi-year project. So this was a 2-year project, 1 year of implementation, and we feel like we've just scratched the surface of connecting with the community in that time. So out of this, we'll have 150 new large stature trees planted in this neighborhood. However, I think it could grow a lot more, where we could have many more trees planted with a little more dedicated time spent here. So those are areas we're hoping to develop in the near future, and ultimately leading towards a strategic and coordinated effort within Waterloo region to address tree canopy inequality. I think that's it from us. Thanks everybody for your attention.
Thank you so much, Becca, Aaron, Patricia, and Peter. And Aaron, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. And we'll jump into the Q&A. And if I could ask the presenters, we may go over time. I hope that's okay with you. We have a number of questions, so I will go right into it. The first couple of questions are for Patricia and Peter. Is there a minimum size for a healing forest? This is from Carrie Butcher, and she's thinking of small parks in urban spaces, like where she lives in downtown Hamilton.
So no, there is no minimum size. There's a church close by to where I am. And I think the space, and Peter, I think this is correct, it's around 20 feet by 40 feet, and it's a small space. The one space that the church had available in a downtown setting, they're surrounded by streets. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter what size, it's, you know, whatever space that you have available, and you want to make it into a healing forest space.
All right. About the healing forest, this is an interesting question of would it be inappropriate to have a healing forest in a residential backyard?
Do you want me to take that?
Sure.
In a residential backyard. Okay, so that's private land. I mean, a backyard can also be quite huge. You know, some homes have large backyards,
Like
and
Gary's.
that's right. And so the key thing is that if you want to develop a healing forest in the backyard, great, but it's got to be done with the cooperation, involvement, and partnership with the traditional landholders of where that healing forest would be, so that they are involved with the vision and development of that space.
Yeah, and
right.
when you're creating a healing forest, what its purpose is usually to allow people to come and gather. So if it ends up on our website, people might be, hi, can we see a healing forest? Invite them in for tea.
Thank you, Patricia and Peter. And I'll come back to you a bit later, but a couple of questions now for Aaron and Becca. So the first question is, are you keeping urban interface principles like wildfire migration in mind as you create and roll out your plans?
I think that's with respect to like spacing and density of tree planting in an urban area. If not, maybe that person could jump in with a clarification. But in terms of that, we have pretty high standards for spacing when we're looking for plantable spaces through our program. And again, with our partnership with the municipality, they have just as high of standards for what they consider plantable in terms of setbacks from buildings, property lines, utilities. So we did try to keep that upfront and clear, and we have had to say like certain folks who wanted to plant on their property weren't eligible because of those considerations. So we are trying to keep all that front of mind and well communicated to prospective tree owners, so that we're not planting trees that will become a burden or have to be removed in the short or medium term for those reasons.
Thanks, Becca. And I have another question for you and for Aaron. I know it was mentioned, and this is from Sandra Notaro. I know it was mentioned that residents had to be educated why trees can't be planted on an old landfill site. What about someone's backyard that may have some level of contamination in their soil? Have you come across such concerns?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thankfully, we haven't come across any contaminants that seem to be really impactful yet, but there can definitely be conditions in urban environments, even if it's compaction or just poor soil quality in general, that kind of guides us towards certain tree species that we know are going to be more tolerant of that. So that's the benefit of, I think we're up to 15 different native tree species that we now have available. And part of the consultation that we'll do with property owners is deciding and guiding them towards a tree that's going to do best for their property.
Thanks, Aaron and Becca. Now I'll shift the conversation back again to Peter and Patricia. Now, a really quick question from Rebecca McDonald. The logo for the Healing Garden is beautiful. Is the artist Indigenous? You may have answered this earlier, but just for clarity's sake.
Diana Coots is not Indigenous. Peter and I had reached out to, it was about 5 different Indigenous artists. And we'd sent a bunch of material to an Indigenous artist, and we thought, okay, this is it. This is the this fellow's going to draw it. But then he got busy, so there were a lot of different issues that arose for the Indigenous artists we were reaching out to, and so in the end, because of reconciliation, you know, where initially we did want to have an Indigenous artist create the logo. In the end, Diana was so taken with the project, and she had such a warm and beautiful heart that she was able to capture what we were looking for in that particular logo.
Thanks, Patricia. And just a quick note to you and Peter. I think you've been answering questions on the chat box, but addressing it just to the hosts and panelists. So everyone else, they're not seeing your responses to some of their questions or what you're sharing.
Okay.
So, and one more question for the both of you. Has there been an attempt to connect these various healing forests or the people who are involved so that they can learn and grow with each other?
That's a plan. That's a plan we're looking at in May. Peter, you can take that.
Sure. We're in the very, very preliminary stages of doing I guess a conference, a one-day conference, if you want to call it that, or a gathering. It'd be more appropriate, on healing forests in Ottawa in 2025. We haven't started the planning yet, but it would be the 10-year anniversary of the Healing Forest Project. So that's one thing. And the other thing too is that regardless of whether this conference gets going, we can connect healing forest developers or champions, we call them, or visionaries, with communities that are just at the very beginning stages of their healing forest journey, so that they can talk to each other and learn from each other.
Yep. We do send out messages to everyone periodically, so everyone's up to date on what another healing forest may be doing. And so, yeah, there's always that opportunity for a connection and sharing between the different healing forest champions.
Thank you. Now, we're almost at the top of the hour. There are a couple more questions. I will ask one more question for Aaron and Becca. So the question is from Trevor Scott, and his question is, many well-established, at least 20 years or older, it seems, middle-class suburban areas lack trees. Seeing this, I've had the impression this is intentional, that homeowners in these areas do not desire a tree canopy in both front and backyards. Would this be an accurate impression? If so, what do you feel the reason would be?
I can take that one as well. That's definitely a good question. And I think it goes back to the planting trees where residents want them most. So I don't think it's fair for us to assume that every resident wants trees, and we've definitely come across residents that don't. But what I do think our mission in that regard is to help inform and educate residents as to the benefits of trees, whether it's reducing their heating and cooling costs, supporting wildlife, reducing stormwater runoff. The list goes on. Once we have the conversation to say, there are benefits that you can get from this tree, it might change their mind and it might not. And if it doesn't, we're happy to let them enjoy their yard as well.
Can I just add one thing? One thing we learned through the work we've done this past year in the Chandler-Mowat community was that people have legitimate concerns and reasons for not wanting a tree, and it's important to respect that and listen and understand. So for example, there could be large financial burden to having a tree, a mature tree that's unhealthy in your yard, quite impactful and expensive to remove, potentially dangerous. So yeah, back to what Aaron said, we just want to maintain clear eyes and not assume trees are the only solution in every location, and to be respectful of those reasons and provide that additional educational layer, as Aaron mentioned.
Thanks, Becca and Aaron. And we actually are going to get through all the questions that were asked today, and I will ask the final question for Becca and Aaron. When considering trees, do you consider the number of insects that the trees host?
Yes, in that we only have native trees with a little asterisk beside the apple and pear that we've added to our roster of trees. And as Aaron mentioned, the most important thing we consider above the wildlife value, assuming they're beneficial native insects that we want to have, I would say the most important thing we consider is soil and what tree will thrive and reach maturity. All the native trees support some level of insects, some more than others, but if it's not able to reach its full mature size, we will never see the full benefits from that tree. So most importantly, we're looking at site conditions first, and then knowing that we'll always recommend a native tree that will host some level of insects.
Thank you so much, Becca. And thank you to all our panelists, Peter, Patricia, Aaron, Becca. And Aaron, you'll have the last word, but I just want to thank Nature Canada. Thank you for organizing, for having us, inviting us into this wonderful webinar series. To all the panelists, presenters over the past 3 webinars, thank you so much. It has been great. We would appreciate if our participants could fill out the feedback form. The link is on the chat box. And just as a reminder, the recording and the slides will be made available to everyone who has registered, and you'll get a link to it within 1 business day. Please check out the other offerings of Sustainability Network at sustainabilitynetwork.ca. Have a wonderful day. And Aaron, over to you.
Thanks so much, Victor. I just want to take a moment and thank all of our speakers today for sharing plus the amazing ways that you're working towards equity and reconciliation in your city and across the country. And I just want to thank all the viewers, everyone at home who came and are passionate about this. It's amazing to see such great numbers. And get in touch with me, get in touch with Healing Force, with Reep Green. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So take care, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.